Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Today I've got something pretty different for you. It's a video that has been, I don't know, 7 years or something in the making. It's a video I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and I've just never really had the opportunity to because I was never really able to find the right plugins and stuff that allowed me to record Pro Tools and Pro Tools quality audio. It was something I struggled to really kind of get my head around and find an easier way of doing it, but now I basically found this plugin called Blue Cat's Patchwork, and it's a really easy, simple to use plugin that allows me to stream the audio straight from Pro Tools into OBS and record the whole pro audio and video at the same time. So in this video today, I'm going to be showing you exactly how I mix my drums. Now, I've had quite a lot of comments over the years saying that they really like my drum sound, which I very much appreciate. I understand that my mixing technique and the way I do things is not necessarily the way that a lot of other people would do it. It might not be the standard way of doing things. It's just the way I do it. So take what I'm doing today with a pinch of salt. The way I do things might not be the right way for you guys to do it, but if you do find some value from this video today, please do subscribe and support the channel. So the project that we have in front of me right now is a drum cover that I did a little while ago, and this isn't actually one that's been released yet. I mean, by the time this video goes out, I should have released this one maybe the week or two before. So as you can see from the project name and also from the title of the music that we've got at the top here, this is I Write Sins Not Tragedies by Panic at the Disco, but this is a drumless version. So if I just solo this bit, you can tell there's obviously no drums to this, so it makes my job a little bit easier when it comes to putting in my drums. I'm not having to mask over existing drums. So where applicable, I will use drumless tracks, but it's not always the case. Sometimes you can't find them, so you have to use ones that have already got the existing drums on. It's a bit of a pain, but it's still doable. Now the tracks that I've got here are completely raw. I've not done any processing to them. I've not done any editing or anything like that. So I'm just going to go through them one at a time. Obviously at the top here we've got the kick. This is actually a kick trigger. It's not the kick mic. So I really should have put trigger, but you guys know what I mean. Next we have snare top, and then snare bottom, tom 1, tom 2, floor tom, overhead left, overhead right, hi-hat mic, and a room mono. This is a fairly standard setup of what I like to do. Sometimes I will throw in maybe a ride mic or something like that, but it doesn't always need it. Certainly for this song, I don't think I actually hit a ride in this at all, so it wouldn't have made any sense anyway. And then at the bottom here, I've got a limiter. It's not really doing much, just essentially so it doesn't blow you guys' ears out. And then after the limiter, I've got the Blue Cat's Patchwork, which is using Restream, which is a plugin by Reaper, which basically allows you to send the output signal of any DAW to something like OBS. So if I just play this again, you can see the meters bouncing here. Okay, so we've got that out of the way. Let me just play the drums on their own for you. The drums at the moment don't sound fantastic. They sound okay. I mean, passable. Even if you just had a single mic and you got that kind of sound, you could potentially just EQ it, compress it, bit of reverb, jobs are good 'un. But for this, obviously, I want to get a really good solid sound. So, well, first off, we'll take a look at the kick. Obviously, this is a kick trigger, so most of the time I don't really do anything with this. I just play it as is. Now, obviously, I'm mixing this with the rest of the tracks. So for instance, with the room mono, if I play those together, you'll hear the kick trigger and also the kick drum coming through on this mic. And then without the trigger, so you are getting some of that acoustic kick coming through on the room mono mic. I do think that that's a nice blend between the actual kick sound and the trigger, so you get the clarity and also the acoustic sound. Snare top. Very pongy, so we're going to need to reduce a few things on there. Most of the time I do use like drum dots, the control gels. I don't think I had it on this one. For whatever reason, I can't remember. But essentially, the way I do my mixing is a top-down type thing. So I will mix things in solo, which I know some people really don't like doing. They like to do it in context, and I get that. But I really like to hone in on certain tracks first before then I look at the bigger picture. So I don't make massive moves, I make very small moves. So for instance here, if I just bring up an EQ, and we'll just loop this section here with the snares. Now, there's several frequencies in there that I can hear that I really don't like, and I know that if I compress those, they're going to come out in the main audio. So That's a really horrible one. So as you can see, I've just done these 3 notches here. I do tend to find that there is around the 500 mark that a lot of these really horrible frequencies start poking out. So I've just done this to kind of tame them a little bit. I am a little bit surgical with it. I don't really like to do too many broad strokes. So you can hear how that sounds now, as opposed to with it bypassed. So that to me sounds a lot more tame, a lot more under control, but still has those characteristics of the snare that I wanted to be able to hear. I will also do a high pass and a low pass just to get rid of any unwanted frequencies from the high end and bottom end that the snare's just not really going to use. So around about there is fine. And then we're going to bring up a compressor. Now most of the time with the compressor on the snare top channel, I try to just take off the peaks. I'm not looking to super compress it and get a really harsh kind of sound. I just want to even out all these peaks really more than anything else. So if I bring up the threshold just a little bit, we'll set this going, and then we'll kind of mess around with some of these dials until we get something that I think sounds nice. Okay, so now that we've compressed it, we have brought out some of that mid-range sound that I really don't like. So I'm just going to re-EQ this and just notch a few more little bits. It's mainly this one. So that sounds a bit better to me. It's still got some ring to it, still got some life to it, but it's not got that really horrible mid-section that I don't like. So from there, what I'd like to do is actually bring the compressor down one, and then we're going to add a very small amount of reverb. So full gain on that one. I like to have it on Hall, small, a pre-delay of around about 16, 17 or something like that. And the high frequency cut, I bring that right down because I really don't like a harsh, toppy kind of reverb. It just doesn't sit well with me. And then we've got a 2.2 second delay. That seems to be about right for me. And then we'll bring it down to maybe about 15%. So we'll give that a try. So with the fact that we put the reverb on before the compressor, we don't really need a lot of this at all. I mean, sometimes I'm even tempted to kind of back off the dry to wet signal a little bit more, maybe even bring it down to like 10%. You just want a little bit in there because all of this goes in sequence. So it's obviously going to hit the EQ first, then it hits the reverb, and then it hits the compressor after that. So the compressor is actually compressing the reverb as well. So that'll be about it for the snare top, and then we're going to move on to the snare bottom. Now one of the things I like to do for this is actually take off the reverb and compression on the top one, and I'm going to listen to these together, and we'll just put on an EQ there, because what we need to do is make sure that we get the phase correct. So if I flip the phase, you'll hear a bit of a difference. You'll more than likely hear low end come in. So it's only very subtle, but when I engage the phase flip, you can definitely hear more low end come in. So that means that it's more in phase. Let's then get into the actual EQ side of things. So we'll just engage these again. For this, I want to get rid of all that low end. I'm going to get rid of that boxiness at around about 500. And a bit more clarity in the top end, but again, not too much on that top. I want to be able to control that. See, that's quite a nice sweet sound there, so I want to boost that just a little bit more. Now with the snare bottom mic, I do like to put on a gate because I don't want too much of that rattle and that sizzle coming through after the transient's gone. So we'll go to a gate, I'll put the attack on full, maybe a little bit longer on the release typically, and then we'll just move the threshold around until we find a nice sweet spot. If I make the release just a little bit longer, it makes it sound a bit more natural, like it's not too much of a fast cut off. And then basically I can just do the exact same with these. I'll just bring down the reverb and also the compression. So we're just changing up the settings just a little bit to bring it under control a little bit more. And then we start blending these two together. So if I play them both together. So we've got kind of a nice sound out of those, which I'm really happy with. So now let's move on to the toms. This can be a little bit of a tricky one sometimes because I like to put on a gate because all this information here is not needed. But sometimes when it comes to the actual hit, the transient you can see here, this isn't actually as big of a transient as I would have liked compared to the rest of them. So sometimes, you know, with these transients here and some of the other larger ones like around here, you might get them triggering the gate and opening the gate, and I don't really want that. So either we can try and use a gate to filter out the rest of this and just try and get the settings just right, or we can actually just come along like that and delete them. I tend to do this as a last resort. I don't really like to do this as much as I can because it's time consuming and I don't really like doing it. That being said, if I have to do it, I will do it. Let's just zoom in a little bit more. I'm going to highlight that, and we're just going to have this loop round. It's going to be a little bit annoying to hear it looping round, but we want to be able to EQ this, just get a really nice sweet sound out of it. Now toms, I don't really tend to do too much to them because I just don't think it needs it, but let's give this a go. So what I've gone for here is just kind of boosting the low end a little bit more because I want to get a chunky, even though it's a relatively higher tuned tom, I still want to get some of that low end beefiness out of it. So I've just kind of brought this up a little bit. It's quite ringy, maybe we can get a little bit of that out. Yeah, just a little bit of a dip there I think works really nicely. And then we've got a big scoop at the 500 again. That's a lot of the boxiness, a lot of, you know, where it kind of sounds like you've got your hands over your mouth. It just sounds a bit boxy and a bit horrible. So we want to get rid of that as best we can. From there, we'll move on to the gate and see if we can get this looking a bit better. So for this one, I tend to just have a slightly wider loop. And I'm going to move this up to around about there. See, it's only just triggering at that kind of level. So what we need to do from there is bring up the attack, bring down the attack, take up the release a lot more. I want to bring that to around about 2 seconds. And then we'll bring the ratio of the actual gate itself up. This is because these transients here, I don't want them opening up the gate if I can help it. So I don't know if you could hear that then. Even though the transients are only coming up to about here, they're still opening the gate ever so slightly. You can still just about hear it in the background, which is what we really don't want. So if I bring that ratio all the way up, basically now you hear nothing until it actually hits the tom transient. Sometimes having a gate that harsh is not what you want, so you've really got to be careful with it. And that's pretty much all I will do for the toms. I tend to just copy and paste these settings over to the second tom and the floor tom, and then I'll go in and actually edit them ever so slightly. So we can use the same one. So this is a much cleaner and much bigger transient, so taking into account that there are some others here that maybe aren't quite as clean. But we are quite lucky in that these transients here aren't quite as big as the ones up here. They're close, they're a lot similar, so we might be able to move this down just a smidge more, but there's not really much else we can do there. And then we're going to do pretty much the exact same with the EQ, so we'll take a listen to this. So that's quite a nice sound, I think. And then we just move over to the floor tom. Now again, with the floor tom, the transients for the rest of the bleed is actually really low, so we can lower this threshold a lot more, which is really nice. But then we've got this section here. This could be a potential issue, because even though I'm actually hitting the floor tom quite hard here, the transients haven't related quite well because I'm using quite a lot of dynamics. So you can see, like, in certain areas here, you've got the transients coming through because that's where my accents were, but then you've got the rest of the rumble kind of coming through. So I want to make sure that it's going to get all of that. Which you can tell it's not doing. So what do we do in this situation? Most of the time I'll either cut the rest of it out, or in this case I'm actually going to use automation. And what we're essentially going to do is just a master bypass. That's all we're going to do, because I think the settings that we've got on there are pretty much set for the rest of the track, and this is the only time in this entire track that we play this kind of thing. So if we come over here to the floor tom track, click wave, come down to effects, expand the gate, master bypass, and then we get an option now to change out the master bypass. So if we click around about at the start of it, which is here, and at the end of it, which is around about here, we turn the bypass on just for this section, so it should sound a bit like this. So the master bypass turns back on here, and then slowly but surely tails everything off, which is really nice. For overheads, I tend to just use small amounts of EQ and small amounts of compression because I want to, again, keep the authenticity of the sound on these ones. So let's bring up an EQ. Now there's a lot of boxiness room sound in this, which I'm not happy with, so it's quite bizarre sometimes, just bringing down the 500 there like this and like a bell curve, just how much better that sounds automatically. So if I A-B this, you'll kind of see. So straight away, that's a definite improvement. Now what else can we do with this? Because if we listen out for certain frequencies that will start poking out, we need to start taming those. Tend to find that around about the 1K, maybe even 2 to 3K, there's quite a lot of whistles knocking around, and it's one of the things that really annoys me when I listen to other people's mixes. There's still these weird whistles in there around this area that just don't need to be there. It's just causing a really, like I say, horrible whistling sound, and it just doesn't sound nice at all. But I also will do a high pass filter as well, maybe around about 100 Hertz or something like that, because I want to get rid of all this low end information but not choke it off too much that it starts sounding unnatural. Then with the highs, there's usually somewhere between 3 and 5K, a bit of a whistle there from the cymbals, so we want to get rid of that. Low pass as well, just to tame that top end as well. So here's a bit of an A-B before and after type thing. Straight away, I think that sounds so much better. Next, we're going to do some light compression. Again, I don't like to overdo things too much. But saying that, I do like to have a fast attack. I like to try and catch some of these transients. Again, what I'm trying to do is some of these snare hits, I just want to tame those. I don't want them poking out too much. So I'm not going to be too aggressive, but I do want to make sure I grab them. So So next what I do is essentially just copy and paste those over to the right channel, and again I will listen to that in mono. See, on this one we're getting a little bit of a different ring. And then what we do is just hard pan those left and right. Now most of the time I'll group these together now because I want to treat them the same in terms of the volume. So we'll just bring those down. Next we're going to look at hats. Straight away some horrible frequencies coming out of that. Now, of course, at no point in there am I playing the hats, so that is just kind of the ambient sound of the bleed from everything else. Let's actually move to a section where we've got some hi-hats in it. So I made some more changes. There's some there's a bit of a low end weird sound there, so I'll play that for you. Mostly I think that was coming off the snare, but it's definitely one that you need to tame. And then we've got a high pass here as well, again just to sort of filter out that low end from the kick drum that we don't want. Now for the hi-hat mic we are going to add a slightly harsher compression because I want to make sure that everything is really nice and tame on this one. But again, we're not going to overdo it so that it doesn't sound like squashed. So I feel like that's catching the transients quite well there, because we are still quite close to the snare on this one, even though it is for the hi-hat mic. Next we're going to look at the room mono mic. So for the EQ here, again, in those mid-ranges, there was quite a lot of notches that need to come down. I've had a low and high pass filter because, again, I want to control the low end and top end on the extremes. There was a bit of a whistle around about the 4K, which I just managed to notch down. But unfortunately, there is still a frequency that's poking through that's really doing my nut in. So we're going to have to add another EQ. But other than that, that sounds pretty tame to me. So after that, we'll add some compression. Again, this one's going to be relatively harsh. as I did before with the snares, I want to bring down the compression a slot, and then I'm going to put in some reverb. Again, not a lot. I don't want to add too much. I don't want to sound like I'm playing in a dance hall or something like that. Just something that gives it a little bit more life, that's all. So for this one, I might go with 15. Same parameters as before. We bring the high cut down. So that sounds pretty good to me. So let's hear all the drums just on their own. So there's definitely a lot of things that are out of proportion here, some things that we need to really tidy up. It's not just down to the mixing side of things, we need to get levels now. So one of the tricks I like to do is bring up this page and then essentially bring down all of the faders, and we start bringing them up one at a time, sort of see how things fit together. So we'll start off with the kick. Now, because later on I'm going to be adding some buses so we can get some more compression out of these tracks, I want to send all of the audio that's going to be going through at a slightly lower rate. So we're going to mix everything to the kick, but we're going to bring the kick down by a few dB. Now toms we're going to have to come back to because we might not be able to actually have any sections that come up with the toms, although I do think we were just about to come up to one there. So let me just pull this to one side. So in terms of panning, the floor tom is going to go, we're not going to pan it hard right, but we're going to pan it really far to the right. Then the tom 2 just a little bit to the right, and the tom 1 a little bit to the left. This creates a little bit more separation. So if at any point I was doing like a roll around the kit, you can really hear going around the kit. And I always mix this from the drummer's perspective because I think that's the correct way of doing it. I just feel like it's better if the listener feels like they're sat behind the kit with you. I really like that idea. Anybody who mixes from the front, you're a monster. Unless it's a live thing, that's different. But for studio stuff like this, yeah, please always mix from the drummer's perspective. Then with the hi-hats, we're going to pan these again pretty hard left. Kick, snares, they are all going to stay center. Room mono, obviously that stays center. So we're pretty much set with all the panning there. So we're getting some pretty nice levels so far. So let's just carry on playing this. So here I really think we've got a nice mix of not only the close mics, but then obviously the room and the overheads and the hi-hats really kind of gelling everything together and creating that space. So things like the close mics get you clarity and the definition out of the instruments that you want, but then the room mics and the overheads and things like that, they get the space, the largeness of the instrument and that really big sound that you want out of a drum kit. You don't want a kit to sound small, you want it to sound big and boomy, but again have that clarity and that definition that you want to be able to hear what parts of the instrument are being played. So next we're going to move on to creating the buses. This just gives us options for more compression because again I want to make these drums sound even bigger than they already are. So we're going to add actually 2 stereo aux inputs, and we've already got the master bus there as well. So the first one we're going to call drums, second one I'm going to call submix. That will become apparent shortly, but for the drums let's put the input as bus 1 2. Output I tend to just, it doesn't really matter, you could use any one of these really, but I just tend to go for 910. That just seems to be my standard for some reason. And then submix is going to be, the input is going to be 910, and then the output of that is to go into the master bus, which is the built-in output 1 2. Now from here what we're going to do is copy the drum bus, and we're going to call this drums comp. Again, all of this will make sense in a few minutes, but for now let's just mute that. Next we're then going to select all of these drum tracks, alt shift and then the output on bus 1 2, and it changes all of the selected tracks over to bus 1 2. Nice little shortcut there. So then when we play the track now, you'll see it all coming through this drum bus. So now all these tracks are being grouped together into this drum bus. It's also going through the drum comps, but we'll ignore that for now. Then it's going into the submix, then it's going into the master bus. So now we can actually treat all of these drum tracks all together, and we can start squashing them together a little bit to make them sound a bit more cohesive. So let's try that. First off, we're going to add an EQ. And again, this is the last time that we're going to be able to EQ the drums. So this is just to kind of sweeten things up, anything that's poking out that shouldn't be. So now we're going to be making smaller but broader strokes. Okay, so here again, I was just feeling like there was too much boxiness, so brought down the 500s a little bit. There was a slight boominess around here, around the 200s, so I brought those down a little bit. But I wanted to boost that real low end, have that kick drum coming through a lot more, and then we've just got a sweetened up top end, but again, not too high, because up here there's just a bit of a whistle. Again, I managed to bring that down, so that sounded a lot better. Again, we'll A/B this so you can kind of hear the difference. I can hear a definite improvement there, and I think that sounds so much better. Next, we're going to add, again, some small amounts of compression. So for this one, I like to use the OwenAlec BG drums. I think it's a really nice bus glue. So for this one, again, we're just going to catch some transients. We're not going overboard on this one. So we'll see how that sounds. So you can see how most of the time the transients are kind of hitting around about here, but then when you hit the snare, it's coming up here. So this bus glue is just to kind of tame those snare hits a little bit more and just bring everything down to a level. But we are going to just reduce the loudness of that ever so slightly as well, which wants to be a bit more in keeping. And then finally, one of my favorite plugins that I love to use, I know it's supposed to be more of a mastering type thing, but I like to use it on these as well, JST Clip. This thing is brilliant. So it's essentially just like a limiter in a way. You single knob, it makes everything louder and kind of compressed a little bit more together without it clipping and without it sounding too weird. Obviously, if you go too powerful with it, then yes, it can do, but you've got to be very careful with it. But it's a great tool to use. So that's about all I do for this drum boss. Then let's move on to the drum comp. So we are going to copy all of these plugins over, but with these two bottom ones, the compression ones, we are going to be a lot harsher with these. So let's mute the first drum boss, and you can kind of hear how we're going to go about this now. So you can really tell this is starting to sound huge now. Whilst we're not going to be using too much of this, this is again it's parallel compression, so we're just going to blend it with the original signal. So if we bring down the drum comp entirely, then we start to play a louder section like this. And then we're just going to bring up the compression bus until we start hearing it blending with the original. So at this stage, the drums are sounding really big, massive, really powerful, but very clear at the same time. So I'm really happy with how this is turning out. Bearing in mind, I am mixing this on headphones, which I never do. I always use my studio monitors. So I will, of course, have a listen to this on my studio monitors at some point before I actually put this out. But essentially, this is what it's going to sound like. So now it's time to add in the backing track. So if we play this now, more than likely the drums are going to be way too powerful for the actual song. So let's listen to how that sounds. Actually, that's pretty close. That's not too bad at all. So this is what the submix is. So we're going to route the original track at the top straight to 910. So this is going to go straight to the submix. So it's going to skip all of these buses and just go straight to the submix. Now, because the drums that are coming through are actually quite loud, I am going to bring these down by a few dB. That sounds pretty good to me. I think I will maybe bring up the backing track just a smidge more. Actually, I think that's pretty good where it was. I don't want the backing track to start overpowering the drums, because at the end of the day, it's a drum cover, so you want to be able to hear the drums, but I don't like the drums being too prominent and too powerful, because it just doesn't sound right as a whole cohesive mix. So in the submix, we're just going to do a little bit more compression. Again, it's just all just gelling things together. So now we go to Joel 106 Bus Glue Mix. Now, as I said before, where the transients are coming up to just below where I tend to put my threshold, in this instance, I'm actually bringing it down a bit further because I want everything to start compressing together. It doesn't seem to be a particularly heavy compression, which is really nice, even though it does say crush, which makes it sound like it's really, really bad, but it's not. So in these plugins, you do have the options of doing things like parallel compression if you want to really get it super compressed down here, but then you can bring it down in the mix, so it's just 50%, again, parallel compressing. But I want to affect 100% of the mix, or at least the 100% of the signal that's coming through. Steel, iron, nickel transformer. To be perfectly honest, I never hear a difference between these. I'm half convinced that they're just there for show, but either way, we'll just leave it on nickel because, you know, whatever. And then we're going to do the same with JST clip. So we're going to get this going. So now I do apologise, now that we are getting everything quite a bit louder, I do apologise if this is a bit loud for you guys, so please do adjust your volumes accordingly. But we're going to get to the master bus now, and we've got the limiter on here. So we're going to have the ceiling at -0.4, and then the threshold we're going to bring down until we start seeing the attenuation coming down approximately 2 to 3 dB. That's where I tend to have mine sitting too much. I don't like to overdo it because I still want there to be at least some dynamics in there. So pulling the threshold down to -3.8, it gives me an attenuation of about 2.6 dB. That's exactly where I want to be. Again, any more than that, and you're going to start coming into clipping issues, horrible kind of crunch that goes on top of some of the guitars, and fizz, and it's just a really horrible sound that I don't like. So I'd rather back the limiter off just a little bit and sacrifice a little bit of volume for actual clarity and fidelity of the audio. So from here, I'll probably just end up cleaning up the audio a little bit more, just get rid of some of these dead spaces here. As you can see, I do start playing here. Just closing the hi-hat, so nothing special, but anything before that is just not needed, so I'll probably just end up getting rid of all that. So from there, I just export it as a WAV file. Typically, I'll do either 44.1 or 48 kilohertz, 24-bit WAV files, and I'll just import that into Premiere Pro with the video, cut it all together, and upload it to YouTube. If you guys would like to see a full breakdown of how I actually make the videos themselves, from the actual recording process inside of the room itself, and then putting the video onto my computer, like I say, doing the mixes again here, putting the whole thing into Premiere Pro and cutting it from there, you guys let me know. If that's something that you want to see, please do let me know in the comments. Perhaps we can even do this on a live stream at some point. Live streaming is something that I've definitely been wanting to do at some point in the near future, so if that's something that you guys want to see, please let me know. But other than that, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys have got something out of it. If you have, leave a like on the video, subscribe, all that good stuff, because it really, really does help the channel. Thank you once again, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.